Well, hello. It's Friday. Welcome, everybody, to Friday. As we already discussed, that it's probably 5 o'clock somewhere, just not in California or New York yet. So, anybody else in the world, go ahead, pretend it's 5 o'clock. So, I'm very excited because not only is it Friday, but we have Neely here today. And I'm also joined by my favorite co hosts, Shlomo Chop and Rebecca Condrat. And we are going to do another awkward, funny, and hopefully somewhat inspiring and engaging conversation today. And this is our sixth Retails IO podcast. So we're getting there. We're somewhat turning professional. We might know what we're doing. We may not. So bear with us as we continue on this journey of podcasting about all things commercial real estate, innovation, retail. And today we're going to talk top line economics, confusionomics. We don't really know what any of this means, so we're going to go with it.
We're thoroughly confused, aren't we?
So confused.
We'll figure it out. That's what we're getting to. We're figuring out the top line economics. We are also, for those of you who listened to our episode 4, we talked about the barbarians at the gates of Macy's. We had Rick Watson on that particular episode. So I ask you to potentially go back and re-listen to some of the snippets of that, because this is kind of the tail that wags the dog on the conversation of that particular day. And we're going to just see if e-commerce works without retail and maybe have some discussions on that. So, Shlomo, I know you've got a lot.
Thank you, Jessica. And by the way, I love the getup. Did you get that e-commerce? You can return it tomorrow when you finish and charge them $10 both ways in shipping.
Brick and mortar. This was a Party City brick and mortar buy. Yep. This did not come via e-commerce. Everybody.
Interesting. I'm in favor of buying from Amazon because they lose every order. So it's like, we just pay them. They pay us $10 each way. So, all righty, guys. Thank you so much for coming. So top line Confusionomics is really a financial term, right? That yours truly either found on Google and made up. I'm not sure which one it was. But everybody seems like, oh, there's such demand. We're confused. So who better to talk to about at least figuring out like some more confusing, they say sometimes you ask a question, you get more questions. Well, at least we'll get there. That's for sure. So welcome to Neely Taminga. So Neely Taminga is a co-founder of Distill. It's a specialized advisory firm. She helps CEOs and boards navigate consumer behavior all through the economic lens, because the economic lens is sort of, the numbers point you in which direction you should be looking. And then obviously you get into the whole marketing. That's a step 2. But the purpose is you need to know where to look to start with. And she's the former head of consumer sector for an investment banking firm at Wall Street. So a trailblazer. I'm pretty certain in your day, they weren't that many women in that role when you started. No,
I was the first. You want to hear this? I was the first woman at my firm that actually took a parental maternity leave.
I'm glad the guys didn't take maternity leave.
I should say in my department, like of peers.
Wow. But I'm glad the guys didn't take maternity leave. I mean, that's good. But I think there's some glass in you here if you check. I think there's some glass over there. But and Neely's line, I've heard her say multiple times, of economic data or nutrition, she'd be a nutritionist. The point is she'd have to get to it before I ate it, is really the truth. So thank you so much for joining us. And I think, today, Top Line Confusionomics is really a reflection of how companies and startups and Wall Street and Silicon Valley have been chasing the consumer. Like, how do we get more sales? How do we get more of the money coming in, and less bottom line or the expense or the results of the top line minus the expenses? So if not profitability, because it seems like profitability is like now optional. I mean, you could literally be a multi-billion-dollar company and not be profitable. You could be a tail wagging the dog company where your core businesses aren't profitable, and you have a side business where you sell, watches out of a trunk of a car, and that makes you profitable. So many companies have secured funding based on what seem to be top line business models, and they're focused on consolidating demand as opposed to solid unit economics. You go into any VC, it's great. You go into VC, they go, well, can we talk about unit economics? I'm curious what happens in that room when someone talks about the unit economics. Like, do they like bake a cake on the spot and say, oh, wow, this is like something that's going to happen? They just go, oh, wow, unit economics suck. We don't really understand it, but you know what? We buy your dream. Who knows? So we asked our guest, Neely, whether Wall Street and Silicon Valley operate on this new type of financial modeling, and if so, how does it even work? So Neely, thank you so much for being here today. And what's new out there? Like what's going on in your day to day? Just like watching what's happening in the markets and watching, just in the world. Well, let's keep it to the U.S. for now. That's political discussion. That's war discussions. Shed some light for us, please.
Well, I think, as I was preparing for our time together, our broader theme for our clients this year is this year's going to require, nuance, right? To kind of navigate through a lot of noise. I think it was really easy to figure out what's going to happen when you shut down the economy, for 18 straight weeks and tell people you can't work. And then hand them $1.7 trillion of direct stimulus payment. They spend, right? And so candidly, it was pretty predictable. I think anybody on the street could have figured out how the consumer was going to behave over the last 2 years. What's going to be very difficult, though, is the next 22 months or so, right? Beginning in 2022. And I love that Rebecca's like, yep, I'm seeing it too, right? And that is, there's a lot of layers that we have to kind of unpack. As I was preparing for our time together, my pause for a little bit of poise on this conversation was actually inspired by wisdom derived from biblical proportions. And that is, there's nothing new under the sun, right? And when I went through and recasted history of retail, I thought, there's probably a worthwhile conversation the four of us could have, just remembering where retail has come to and why it did what it did to this moment, so that we can gain our insights as to where we think it might be going and what's going to matter. So if you will, journey back with me, pre-1900s, right? We all know here, the four of us know, but maybe there's people who are watching and listening who don't know this. Retail was, generally speaking, a general mercantile sort of dry goods meets, agricultural produce, right? It was a marriage. They were doing the Kohl's Aldi combination, before it was proposed a couple years ago, right? At Kohl's. It was the both and. And then, we had a couple wars in that time frame and what have you, but you started to see some of that disaggregation happen by moving grocery away from the dry goods. The dry goods went to the department stores, right? The department stores, and this is all going to come back to Minneapolis, which is where I live, and I love this. 1956, Southdale Mall became the first enclosed mall of the United States of America. And that was based here in Edina, Minnesota. And all of a sudden, this idea of destination specialty stores kind of around that department store became a thing. That wasn't a thing before. It became a thing starting in 1956. You have a destination department store, you've got specialty stores around it. And here's the insight. It was known traffic, right? It was known destination traffic. And in a world where people were moving into suburbs in Levittown and doing other things, the mall became, for anybody marketing to consumers, a destination known traffic. Well, I could walk you through how we went to Walmart and how, the specialization went from the department stores to, drugstores to paint stores, right? To, we started to have that. We all know that. The four of us know that. But again, people who are listening may not have heard it kind of casted that way. We eventually get to hyper specialization and specialty retail formats. I couldn't remember the name of the brand, but I know there was like a athletic apparel brand, not shoes, clothes, catering to young women between the ages of like 8 and 14. Okay. I mean, like that we went from, everything all under one house to we're going to so specialize our demographics and our categories and put it in a specific place within the mall. Right. I mean, so we've gone through that in retail. Interestingly, we've done that also in direct to consumer and in e-commerce as well, right? We've seen that kind of generalization to hyper specialization. And And we did that because they were able to create structures on the digital sphere of infrastructure around retargeting and iOS and right? Known traffic. They knew how to capitalize on known traffic. iOS 14.5 happened last year, as we all may recall, and that changed the algorithm and known traffic. And so you asked this question about profitability and whether or not we're going around for data and what have you. But I keep thinking we need to rethink and put our retail creative hats on and think through, how do you start thinking through, how do you recreate known traffic patterns again? And that's where we're going to art to in terms of where we need to go. So I've thrown a couple things at you. I would love to hear, did it take you down memory lane? Do you have a favorite? I mean, can you believe we used to actually Jessica's putting it on. I mean, we used to walk out of Sears department stores with paint buckets, right? I mean, like, this is crazy for people to think that that actually used to be the case. But I remember that. Buy tires, right?
You make this sound as easy as what? I'm backwards. One fish, two fish,
three fish.
But here's the deal. I mean, your example of 100 years ago did take me down memory lane. I mean, I recall, but it was just mercantile when they were like, I mean, and I'll tell you, Kohl's and Aldi, I mean, they were taking returns for Amazon back then as well.
Mm-hmm.
But very interestingly, what you said, like, and by the way, I'm gonna in public compliment you, because I really like people able to take confusion, which is what's been going on in my mind, and distill it down to, like, we need to know known traffic patterns. What was the term you used?
Yeah, known traffic. We need
like,
to arc back to
it's very simple. It's like, whoever could figure out the known traffic patterns, let's go, right? Mm-hmm. I'll advocate. Rebecca, Jessica is like, we know that they live nearby, that they'll walk nearby. They're not plugged into the wall through data, so maybe that's where we start. That's a very interesting point. I'm gonna add that to my deck.
Which it's a very fundamental piece of retail leasing, and I think Rebecca, working with digitally natives, right? When you're looking for retail space for these very niche retailers, you do look at co-tenancy. It's something that we fundamentally use in retail every single day. Who are your co-tenants in this particular neighborhood or this mall or the street retail? And so much of retail is actually built around this consumer behavior, and you want to have that consumer and know that they're there. So in terms, it's fundamentally so ingrained into what we do. And it's interesting to hear that if you really take a step up and look at the history of retail, we really aren't reinventing anything here. I mean, we call ourselves the innovators, but we're not reinventing anything. We're best reflecting on trends of the past and figuring out how those trends would come forward. It kind of reminds me of fashion right now. Like, bell bottoms are back in.
Yes.
like mom jeans are now straight leg jeans, and like bell bottoms are in, which was very reminiscent of like 6th grade for me, which was the 1990, I don't know, it's the 90s. So, which bell bottoms were certainly not a new thing in the 90s. So here we are again. And whether it's fashion or retail or the economics at play here, we are just following trend lines. It's just a matter of if we're smart enough to pick up on those trend lines.
Yeah. And I think, Neely, the known traffic, kind of metric, if you will, is really critically important, but also something that you said, which is, we don't know what the consumer behavior will be in the next 22 months. I am not, like you, surprised by what has happened in the past 18 or 20 months, but what the next 22 months hold, I, as you said, Jessica, I talk to brands all the time that are looking for, like, where should I open my next store? I think I've shared on this podcast, everyone is moving from the Northeast and like the New York and California, kind of sectors to the South, where the traffic is really flush and people are kind of out and shopping. I think that's shifting up here now, so again, like we're trying to read the tea leaves, but we kind of don't actually know. So I think maybe the question is, what are you seeing in terms of brands' abilities to stay agile, or like folks that you're talking to, like, what are you seeing kind of in your circles, in your world?
This is the tricky part, right? Because if you start thinking through how the human capital elements might have evolved from mercantile to specialization to the growth of retail and what have you, I mean, let's just cut to the chase. Human capital leads all financial capital. Yeah. And so when we're in these points of confusion, you have to unfortunately probably make some sort of shift on allocation of resources, what have you, right? And so it's interesting to, Jessica, going back to your point, when I was just rethinking through and synthesizing the history of retail and writing out in my little nerdy way, kind of different columns of, what happened here and what happened then, because that's how nerdy brains like mine work. I was thinking about, yet again, here's retail has the upper hand because they actually have co-tenancy clauses and GLA occupancy, requirements and what have you. Digital marketers don't have that. Right? Like when they're creating all of these infrastructures and spending millions of dollars, right? And buying teams of people and words and things like that and blog posts, right? There's no contractual agreement that they're going to be able to maintain that known traffic, whereas brick and mortar retail does, right? Because of their those co-tenancy clauses. So I mean, there's some beautiful legal protection that exists still in big box that doesn't exist in digital world. Certainly doesn't. I don't think it exists in the metaverse either. Like are there co-tenancy clauses in the metaverse?
Ooh, I don't know. But it will. I bet there's going to be lawyers that specialize in metaverse Chanel being next to, right? Not next to metaverse Balenciaga or something.
Oh,
wow.
I can't believe the violations on those clauses.
You know what? If you're worried about gas getting to the shopping center, good luck with your gas fees on the metaverse is the first thing I'd say. But alone, what you're just talking about, Neely, I mean, you talk about, co-tenancy, you talk about GLA, right? This is the GLA of the digital environment, right? This is the GLA. And everyone's trying to get into here. Mm-hmm. And they basically pay this rent on an ongoing basis and outbid each other in like real time. And ultimately, it's not tied to sales. There's no committee going, well, we should just leave Facebook for now because Facebook isn't delivering for us. It's not a tenant's market there. It's a landlord's market, that's for sure, right? Mm-hmm. Which is really interesting. So I think that's crazy important. And there's been a lot of issues obviously since 14.5, since the flow of traffic. So I think that's important.
And Android's coming. I mean, so Android's already announced they're basically doing the same thing, right, that Apple did last year. So this is not a 1-year blip in our data dynamic like this. I would imagine the conversations internally, if they're not already, probably should have some sort of recognition that we need to do things differently. What does this mean? And I would love to hear, Rebecca, from you on some of your brands. I mean, I would imagine you might have people who are parting voluntarily out of organizations, maybe not getting replaced kind of during this period of uncertainty. That would seem to be the first sort of move you would do. And then do you start just outsourcing it to people who live and breathe this, all day long?
I mean, so interesting. You should say that. I started my business, which I help direct-to-consumer brands largely, not exclusively, but largely enter into retail and expand their retail presence. And, that happened in July of 2020. And I knew that July through really the end of the year, let's call it Jan of 2021, was like pretty lean, but I was like, no way retail's going away. Like, this is not, if anything, it's going to come back with a vengeance. And so many folks are going to need help. And that in fact has so far, and who knows what the future holds, right? I've been very fortunate that has proven true. So I think you're right, Neely. I think, a lot of brands are realizing there is deep expertise that exists. And, it doesn't need to cost me a full-time C-suite head at this stage, right? At some point that becomes true when it's a substantial part of the business and it warrants that level. But like, really at the building blocks stages and at the testing stages, I think a lot of brands are now more willing than ever to work with experts outside of their organization.
Yeah. I see what you see. Jessica, what about you? How does this resonate and land?
Well, and really, and Shlomo and I were talking about this, is how this affects commercial real estate in terms of development, space being taken, and space, actually the disposition of space too, is the turn of this. And that's where I think Shlomo and I tend to scratch our heads and go, what's next? Because we see there's a potential big amount of disposition of space as retailers continue to go to consultation or figure out how to streamline their business formats. And it doesn't have to exist in 50,000 square feet anymore. It exists in 25,000 square feet. So what do you do with this space? What do you do with this excess retail? And how do you reinvent that retail to meet the dynamics of what's going on in the future and be ahead of that curve, so you're not sitting on 25, 30, 40,000 square foot, or the return of the Macy's box. Let's say, going back to the Barbarians at Macy's Gate, what happens when a Macy's goes dark? What do you do with that box? And that's where Shlomo's taken so much time to figure out, how do you reuse and repurpose this real estate? And so when I start to think about the trends of what's happening on the top line and watching especially the niche brands become so much smarter in terms of how they're using their resources, whether that's from a personnel perspective and using outside consultants, to how they're using their actual footprint to have a greater sales per square foot. It really begs the question of, what is the innovation that's coming next, and what is that trend line, and how do you work within that? And so it kind of brings us to the question of, why would you split apart e-commerce from brick and mortar when, as we were saying, the tail wags the dog here, the e-commerce isn't what's necessarily pushing the profitability of retail. Retail is pushing the profitability of retail. And so that's where it starts in my mind, on the actual physical footprints of these buildings. How do you tie this all together to be ahead of the curve? And so I can advise my clients who own buildings of, this is what's coming next, or this is what we should be thinking of. Because at the end of the day, I'm an advisor and influencer to my clients who are the landlords out there. Just like Rebecca is out there working with the tenants, and she's influencing and advising them how to be prepared to live in brick and mortar. So that's where I see this whole tie together, is what can I do with this information to help build the next generation of retail? Because retail really hasn't stepped off of a cliff in the way we develop it since the 80s. In all reality, it's been the same exact developments since the late 80s. We've never seen a shift in how we develop, whether it's a power center, whether it's a grocery anchored center, or even a strip center. It's been the same development patterns for 35 plus years. And then we wonder why the Amazon effect happened, or retail is dead, or brick and mortar is going away. No, it's not. We just don't build retail that fits the current dynamics of consumer spending, consumer habits, and we're undermining actually the veracity that brick and mortar truly does have to the markets.
Totally agree with you there. Yeah. I mean, and you can understand why, right? I mean, I always like to say that, corporations are people are patterns, patterns are to be observed and rarely disrupted, right? I mean, that's where, if it's the same real estate crew that goes from one big box to the next big box, they're going to use their same playbook. Right?
Yes. The same people, the same playbook, the same people. Yeah,
right. We
both rinse and repeat. Just keep going with it.
Well, it's all McKinsey, Boston Consulting, all these guys, the same guys come back over and over, and they're taking another stab. I'm going to Shop Talk this coming week. I guarantee you, there's going to be somebody with a thesis. There's no question. And you know what's going to happen? Some board's going to implement that thesis. You know what's going to happen? It's going to fail again. Because they're all looking at the prize of the future. Like, where are we going? We're going to freaking Mars. We're not going to Mars. We may, but that's not your problem. Your problem is profitability. So I want to
ahead of us. Yeah.
I mean, well, we got a plan for it. No problem. Go do your thing.
Metaverse first, then Mars, right? Is that how that goes?
No, we gave up on Mars. Going to the metaverse.
We gave up on Mars.
Yeah.
So Elon is all in on Mars, you guys. I got to tell you,
I spoke to him yesterday. He told me that. Yeah,
he's still all in on Mars, so nothing to worry about there.
I want to back up a bit to this confusion and how it came about and all that stuff, right? So let's be real. We live in a society today where the pizza delivery guy has become a public company. Let that sink in.
He actually, the pizza
Where's that
delivery guy,
margin
in all
coming
reality, should
from?
get a lot more respect for what he did. He was the inventor of Uber Eats.
There we go. Well, a DoorDash, a Grubhub, and I know there's a lot of people in Silicon Valley or whatever. Hopefully, they're all watching us, which I'm sure they're not. But the point is, a lot of them are like rolling their eyes right now. This guy doesn't even get it. He doesn't even understand it's a data play. Oh my God. Let's not even go there. We'll get to the data play soon. But the point is, you know, being on the real estate side, I've heard people go and saying, oh, online, it's never going to happen. People got to touch and feel. That's all nice and good. Ultimately, people went online because it's convenience. Then they're like, oh my gosh, brick and mortar is dead. We're just investing in warehousing and multifamily. Retail is dead. Turns out that demand and top line isn't the whole thing. But still we see. Let's take a company like Amazon. And guys, I'm going to say it out loud because it's come to a point where I'm no longer called a village idiot. I've been saying forever, Amazon. Oh, hold on. Let's stand up, do the salute, right?
It feels appropriate.
That's on.
Shall I going? All right.
Slow going, yes.
We're listening.
Yes. Okay. So Amazon is a company that's the tail wagging the dog. Imagine if Rockefeller said, my whole oil business is only to support my barrel making business. Think about it. Amazon would have lost $24+ billion last year if not for the advertising business. Right? And now everyone's following in the retail space, opening advertisements because what are they advertising for? Ultimately, it has to hit something, right? It's the same thing with airline miles, and I know that it has its own value, but the reality is you're giving away something. It's coming from somewhere. This financial engineering, it's a freaking Ponzi scheme. I don't understand all of it. Number one, I'll be straight with you guys up front about that, but I honestly think there's something there to the point. So my point only is like this. We focus on the top line. We focus on just getting customers. At a certain point, when do the chickens come home to roost? Are we seeing that now with the Honest Company yesterday? Are we seeing that with Uber doing a deal with the taxis? Are we seeing that with, what was the other one that I sent to you, Neely? There was another one, Instacart, slashing its valuation almost 40% because, COVID and the jump up in valuation probably wasn't that smart to begin with because COVID is a passing thing and we're not going to all go around with masks for the rest of our lives unless we're flying. Yeah, I guess. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is like, this is a very God's honest, serious question, okay? Mm-hmm. When these, to the best of your ability, because I know, Neely, if it was you wouldn't think this way, but the bankers sitting around the table, either A, being pitched by some fast delivery guy saying, you know, the total addressable market is $3 trillion, and then there's 70 other people also doing it, which means your addressable market is divided by 70 and maybe divided by half once they go out. And eventually, if you can survive, right? And it's almost like it wasn't even the Big Short where the guy had to feed the short, right? It's not even that. What happens to those guys? And secondly, you know, the guys in Silicon Valley, they're smart people. They're not dumb. I mean, I'm not smarter than them. What aren't they seeing? Or is it just that they acknowledge this is all, we're just trying to jack the value so we get a Series B, Series C, Series D. I sell out, have a good day, and we'd love the banks hold the bag. Like, what's happening at the other side of the table? I really genuinely did not understand, ranging from an Amazon to a Getter or to a Fridge No More. I mean, what are these smart investors thinking? I don't understand it.
One fish, two fish, blue fish.
Blue fish, right? Let's see if I can.
That's what they're doing. That's probably what they're doing.
Let's.
They were reading Dr. Seuss while we were doing I don't know what.
I love how much your sweater matches the whole outfit. It is bringing me so much internal joy here. It's the best. I think, Shlomo, we have to kind of go back just a little bit again on Amazon's own trajectory, I think, to kind of better try to, you know, create a framework around how to approach Amazon, you know, from a retail perspective. But one would be Amazon built the store. Think about the sequence of things, right? Yeah. They built the store first before anybody really understood what that store was capable of doing, right? And then you had the pathways or the roads, right? The internet, right? Desktop. Let's just go ahead and say mobile phone, mobile commerce, right? But mobile wasn't cool until 4G LTE kicked in. So, there was this delay sort of awareness. And the whole time, I will just articulate, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they understood that things were going to be deployed somewhat out of order and somewhat illogically, right? Speed didn't happen first. Speed is where they ended, right? With how having to do untethered commerce. And then you had a global pandemic, which threw everybody on their phones, right? And created a situation where we were just all consuming all the time, ambient, internet, ambient transactions, untethered transactions, like all of it.
Yeah.
Okay. But to Rebecca's earlier point, who knows how the consumer is going to behave on a go-forward basis? And anybody, and I would say this, if Jeff Bezos is watching this right now, I would tell you, the moment you think you have the consumer truly figured out, get ready to get humbled. Okay. Because CEOs of department stores and cosmetic companies before Ulta and Sephora deployed, right, thought the same thing. I won't say who it is, but I had a very high-ranking, notable global CEO of a cosmetics company once, when asked by me in a posture of humility, I asked, what do you think about Bare Essentials when Bare Essentials was taking their market share? And he said, just very, very upset. Department stores have really forgotten who got them to where they are today. Right. So, the hubris that occurs when you're in market leadership, we all have our stories. I'm not going to call it just one CEO. Like, anybody is susceptible to that. Any human being is susceptible to that. So market position leader, not optimal. And you could get your goose cooked pretty fast. Rebecca, would you weigh in on, does it resonate?
Well,
am I being gentle enough?
No, you're great. You're great. You're being super gentle, similar to I spoke with someone, leadership, D2C brand, et cetera. And I guess to kind of in this same vein of what we're discussing, I am surprised. And Shlomo, this goes directly to your question / statement / the content today that we're talking about, at how much emphasis we're still putting, these brands rather are still putting on top line and not caring if there's profitability. And I'm floored by that. This was this conversation very recently. And I was like, wait a second. I thought we got rid of that when all of the crazy logistics supply chain started happening and people started going, oh, I need to actually look at my bottom line. But apparently top line is still the only thing that matters and profitability doesn't matter. And I'm just like, when does the shift occur? Or I don't know, maybe it is. I don't know if that answers your question, Neely.
Is this the new normal? Is top line going to be how we value business? Are we done with the bottom line? Is profitability gone?
Right.
Jessica, I mean, Jessica, here's the thing. How come I don't know sucker investors? I mean, seriously, the ones that don't need me to return their money. I mean, I'd like to know a few of those, okay? It's ridiculous. So if you think about it, like, I can understand.
Thing 1 and thing 2. It's fine. They've got plenty of money.
Okay, so here's the thing, okay? Here's the thing. I get that starting a business requires additional marketing dollars to build yourself up to a plateau, to a point where you could catch up with your expenses, right?
Sure.
But it has yet to be proven that you could catch up with e-commerce expenses. Has yet to be proven that some of these that the pizza delivery guy could be its own operation. It's yet to be proven, and yet we're doing it, and we're going. And you know what this is? Honestly, Grubhub, DoorDash, these guys, all they're doing is basically trying to get restaurants to be able to use their own software as a service that's cheaper to basically delegate and basically allow them to get cheaper delivery people to be on their service and pay them each a small amount of money, as opposed to having this entire operation. They're pushing us to the future. There's no question. But until there's some profitability, there won't be. So the question I'm trying to understand, and perhaps Neil, you're way too classy to take me on in this question, which is like, what are these smart Harvard, Stanford? What are these guys thinking when they see these decks? I mean, and how do I get them to basically look at something that sort of makes sense and buy? Because I've given up on the VC market with regards to stuff I'm doing that's fundamental. I mean, or are they basically saying, listen, if we can survive, it'll figure itself out? Is that what's happening?
It's such a great question. I would love Rebecca and Jessica to weigh in on this as well. And now let me just give you one more framework back. If we were to distill, it's in the name, you can look. Seriously, the best money we ever spent was paying an agency to come up with our name for our company. It's the same agency who named J. Crew too. So there you go. All right.
They did a better job with you, by the way.
Well, thank you. So let's distill it for you. And that is, if that whole buildup of dry goods and grocery, mercantilism, all the way to specialty, if you will recall, this goes back to, you're going to love this fun fact because I am a nerd, to Edina, Minnesota again. And that is same-store sales. Jerry Gallagher was the founder of same-store sales. He's passed away in 2014. He was actually a dear friend of mine. And he was the inventor of that metric. He invented it with when W.T. Grant was on the scene and he had to figure some things out. He was working for DLJ and he created that metric to assess the health of a retailer. And so if we had to figure like one metric that kind of ruled them all in retail, right, it was same-store sales. That one metric that has ruled them all in e-commerce has been customer acquisition, right, costs. And it's conjecture at this point on my part, but I would imagine if there isn't lively debate about how that's being calculated right now or what that measurement looks like coming off of 14.5 and, you know, the relief of no longer being online as much from an purely ambient sort of perspective, right? And a kind of a pandemic sort of panacea, right? I would imagine customer acquisition costs are going to go through the roof right now, relative to where we've been. And that, Shlomo, going back to your question, if anyone's looking at those decks, you better be digging if those numbers are looking a little too healthy, because mathematically they shouldn't be in 2022 relative to 2021. I would dig deeper, right, into what's actually being put into those numbers. I would do my diligence in and around those numbers. So, you know, we're just at the precipice, I think, of truth willing out on who's going to win and who's going to be reconsidered or rethought. And it's not the whole industry that falls apart, because if you are a brand and you actually own that destination traffic because you're as good as your next customer says to their friend, you are going to win. That I have no doubt in my mind. Unequivocally, you win. But we will see a sifting. We will see a reckoning of, that was for your brand, Rebecca. I did that for you.
That's for me.
Yeah, we'll see a reckoning.
Yeah.
Dad jokes,
you know, some of the losers. And then we can have a lively conversation about, okay, well, if you just go down the P&L, what are those levers and what are we going to, it's not cost of goods. We're not going to find our profitability through cost of goods anytime soon, you know, in today's inflationary environment. You know, is it new customers? It's probably new customers through store partnerships, right? And through kind of unique engagement. But then those stores are going to hold you to be accountable to actually be a good brand that's actually going to draw. So I'll pause there. I'll land the plane, as it were, slow-mo on that point. But this is a year of reckoning, no doubt in my mind.
Yep. Agree. I agree 100%. And I think too, Neil, you bring up a really good point about, you know, the rising customer acquisition costs. And I think that is why, and look, this is, as you said at the very beginning, nothing is new under the sun. It's all cyclical. Everything repeats itself. Bell bottoms come back. You know, it's atrocious. We all deal with it. But, you know, I think on the e-commerce retail, you know, side, it's brands realizing, oh, my CAC is so much lower from my brick and mortar stores. My customer lifetime value is higher from my customers that shop in stores and then convert to online. Like, oh, hey, maybe I'll go. What was that Times article? It was like, brands are trying a new marketing strategy, stores. And I was like banging my head against the wall, right? Like, who wrote this? I mean,
That one will
the
make
reporter is lovely. It was a great article. I'm not saying that, but like, so I think you're absolutely right. It's just, yeah.
So one of the explanations I heard was that it's a data play. Don't you get it, Shlomo? It's a data play. How? I mean, the data's got to do something for you at some point, doesn't it?
But what are you doing with that data when you can't retarget anymore? I mean, to me, this is why the 14.5, the Android deployment, is so critical. And look, smart people are having these conversations, internally at these brands and what have you. They're not being caught unawares. They're not,
Nearly. But why all of a sudden now are they having these conversations? What changed?
Well, because Facebook basically got on their quarter call and said it's a problem. Right?
Oh, okay. I got it. I'm just curious, like, what changed that they woke up finally?
Because look, think about it. Well, actually, this is a great point. It's all about human behavior. If you've been in a marketing department for a pure play DTC this whole time, you might have been seeing some softness in your business and not exactly understanding why things weren't working those first couple months, right? Because PS, we pandemic, and that was 14.5 was deployed at the same time people got to leave their homes and shop again. So, who in that room, I hold no grudge against anyone trying to make sense out of their data, right? When those conditions were happening from an externality perspective. Now, it was well documented that it was coming. So I would have hoped there were some internal conversations about, I wonder what this will mean, right? I hope that there was some sort of fostering of curiosity when this was happening. But that's good. I'm not going to throw shade there. So it took a little bit of while for people to catch on to this. And with Facebook officially, I think they declared it on their second quarter conference call, I think for the first time that this was going to be an issue, or maybe it was their third quarter, it was recently. Then everybody had the ability to kind of fully express themselves with concern without immediately getting fired, probably internally, right? Like, oh, hey, the big guy said it, right? So if it's the big guy, it's also us. So it's human behavior as to why there's a delay. But the delay doesn't change the reality. And so that's the part that I'm sure Rebecca's working with folks on, day in and day out. How do you actually move this idea forward back to a posture of curiosity and improving our marketing trends? There's smart people out there solving for it, but they're largely, I think, in outsourced solutions right now.
So question for the two of you, Neely and Rebecca. So as customer acquisition costs continue to rise, one, what do you think is one of the biggest factors that's causing the rise in that number? And is there a counterbalance in brick and mortar that we should be, as real estate professionals, pressing more when we are speaking to these brands that may be nervous about expansion or are just coming to brick and mortar? I mean, what is the story from, I'm out there telling a story of, hey, you've been online and you've got a great following, but it's costing you more to get that online customer versus if you're in brick and mortar, what is my counter suit to what's going on in the digital world?
I mean, all right. So look, I am not a digital marketing expert. So my very broad understanding to your first question, Jessica, about customer acquisition costs is, at some point, Facebook and social networks were new. They were trying to get brands to advertise on them. They priced those super cheap. Brands were able to join and get super successable. This is like D2C 1.0 or even like pre 1.0, like Bonobos level, right? So like Bonobos, maybe you could probably put Warby Parker in there, like some of the early ones, like Everlane maybe. Those Facebook and the others figured out, oh, brands are going to pay for this. And they started jack up the cost. So then brands moved over to influencers right? So like, again, influencers are new. Instagram is like pretty new. It was just purchased by Facebook or maybe pre-acquisition, right? So like, let's go to these like people and people selling to people and social commerce and all this stuff. Great. You know, now influencers are fully priced, right? So like any channel, you know, same thing with, and again, like don't have a deep knowledge of this, but like SEO, all of that. My understanding is started off inexpensive because it was an unknown quantity. Now it's known that brands want it. Of course, supply and demand, the law says you're going to raise the price, right? So, you know, prices are up. I think, you know, that kind of combined with this like wave of D2C 1.0s testing physical. So like, I remember the Bonobos guide shop on Fifth Avenue. I think it was the very first one, but don't quote me on that. But definitely one of the first ones where it was like, Bonobos has a store, you know, like Michael Praceman from Everlane famously saying we're never going to open stores, and then open stores, you know, so here's the stores, you know, so I think, and then seeing what, as you know, in real estate, like the halo effect, very well documented, you know, very well researched, you know, what happens when a store opens in a market to the e-commerce channel is that there you see a lift from that inevitably, you know, so I think there's that. And then more recently, and I don't think this data point is terribly new, but I would say it's maybe the newest one, is we're talking about customer lifetime value across all channels, right? And so like, this is where, and I don't know that anyone has cracked the code, and I would love to know if like any of you know if anyone is working on it. I think attribution is unclear, and brands are still having a really hard time reconciling that. Like, attribution is not going to be as cut and dry as like, I followed that person, click on my Facebook ad and click on my website and click to buy in the cart. Because in retail, it could be they walked by your retail store and saw you in the window. They Googled you, they searched your products online, and then they went back in the store and bought them. And then they continued, now that they know their size, to buy online over and over again. But there's no way until we get like trackers put in our brains to like really track and say definitively, this is what the store drove, this is what online drove, this is what social media drove. Like, it all just kind of gets jumbled together. So I think the hard thing for landlords, to your question specifically, is, you know, it's a very compelling, like, cumulative or aggregate metric, but like, there's no way to like definitively point to like, this is what my store did. So, I mean, there's of course the 4-wall, right? Like, that's definitive, but like in kind of the brand awareness, brand affinity layer. So that's what's hard about that. So I don't mean to not answer your question, but like to answer it and not answer it at the same time. That's what I got.
No, I love it. And I think that is the question I contend with almost daily, right? Is why would I, or should my store be smaller, or should it be bigger? And it's actually interesting because I've seen a little more flight where people were so concerned about being under 1,500 square feet. There's this concern about how much square footage you're taking. And I'm actually starting to see that dissipate a little bit, where there's less hesitancy to be in a small footprint, because as we've talked about before, we're seeing more distribution come through the retail channel, the store channel itself, right? The brick and mortar channel, and being able to do returns or being able to ship from store. Those types of things are now being integrated in to the retail experience. And as that's happening, they're realizing, I can't do this all in 1,500 square feet. So I'm hoping that's a trend that continues, because I think it does add a really healthy atmosphere to a retail shopping experience. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe that's just a COVID after effect, that before COVID, everybody wanted small, and after COVID, everybody wants a big space. Who knows?
I mean, my like, oh, go ahead, Shlomo.
No, Rebecca, you finish.
I was going to say, and this is very much coming from a place of like, I love store environments and crafting store environments. I think that the sales per square foot metric is overused, because if you have a 3,000 square foot store, but you have such an amazing brand experience that it drives traffic for your brand. And again, this is where that attribution gets like a little bit sticky that like you're in there and people are Instagramming your store, or people are, just hanging out. I don't know. It becomes a community hub essentially, and maybe there's not as much of it is dedicated to actual selling space, but it is dedicated more to like the customer experience. I actually think that that's okay. Yes, your sales per square foot metric might be lower than if you were to put it in a 1,500 square foot store, but then you would have to cut off that. You would have to sacrifice.
You have to sacrifice the experience, which is what's going to drive your demand on the online or the comeback.
Exactly. So I know that metric is going to continue to be a thing and continue to be talked about, but I think it should be balanced with, other metrics around customer engagement.
But what's really cool is that actually brings us again back to the conversation with Rick Watson. If you are creating this experience and we are depending less on price per, if we're not talking about sales per square foot, because we're not talking about bottom line revenue anymore either. So if we're going to like just drop those two things in general, why would you split e-commerce from your retail if you are a Macy's or a Kohl's or any of these brands? Because those two things have to work together in order to bring profitability to the total equation here. And so it's so funny how we can discuss on one hand with Rick Watson and all these trends, and then we come back here and we're again asking the same question, and fundamentally we're getting back to the same point: is these two things, the morons of, I don't even know where, as Shlomo, this is a direct quote, by the way, the morons of, what was it? Hold on, did I write it? The morons.
I prefer you don't repeat things like me calling people morons.
E-commerce works without retail.
What, say again?
And we say no. We say no, sir. No cat, blue cat, yellow cat, orange cat. There's no e-commerce without the retail.
I have a strong opinion on this, but before I go, I want to throw it to Neely because she won't talk if I just monopolize the stage. I don't think I realize.
I love it when a plan comes together and four people just have a topic and you're like, yes, okay. I mean, there's so much connectivity here, and so if I could just dovetail in with your points, Jessica's a great prompt, and Rebecca and the answers, and Jessica, your perspective. Here I'm sitting here thinking through that whole lens of the history of retail and the metric being same store sales. That was the underlying indicator, right, for retail health.
Yeah.
We need a new metric that gives us, and it doesn't exist yet. I haven't seen it. I haven't created it. Mr. Gallagher, unfortunately, has passed away. I'd ask him about it. And, I would. I love that man so much. It breaks my heart that he passed away. But the metric needs to be reflective of the underlying health, not of retail, of the consumer satisfaction. It's not Net Promoter Score entirely, right? I mean, I think there's more that it's part of it, but that's more that needs to be explored. If I were to visually represent, because it needs to work for the retail and the brand as well, right? It has to be this, it can't just be like Shlomo started us out with. He can't just buy things on Amazon to make them lose money. Like that's like mutual destruction, right? Like, he gets
that is how we started this, isn't it?
Right? Or whatever he's buying, but it doesn't, it's not good in the end because there's not a long run game on profitability there. So he's doing it right now. So I think that point is, and I was drawing it this morning as I was preparing for our times, because that's what nerds like me do, right? We need this intersection of mutual assurance. We need this intersection of where the customer can actually be assured that they know exactly what, when, where, why, how they buy, right? And the retailer, the brand needs to know, that they're also assured that they're not going to go bankrupt for doing that service. We need this intersection of mutual assurance. And so there will be an element of profitability. There absolutely has to be attribution, not just across channels, but across time. Right. And it doesn't exist yet. So in the meanwhile, you have to know your customer really, really well. Yeah. So know your customer better than you know your competition. That's the summary.
I've been jumping out of my skin to put this on. Okay, literally. And that's why I said Neely go first. And I still want to ask Neely about adjusted reporting, seasonally adjusted reporting. So I'm going to try to do this quick. Okay. Because I want to explain once and for all sort of like this whole thing. Okay. here's the
You
deal,
know how I
guys.
feel about this.
Okay, and I feel, maybe because I only listen to myself talk the whole time, but I feel like I'm the only person in the world that's sort of been saying this. Oh, and Ryan's the one that sort of taught me half this stuff to begin with. My co-founder on Retailer West. So here's the deal. I mean, same store sales is a nice metric for stores. Sales per square foot is an important metric for stores. You're paying rent. Rent is per square foot, sales per square foot. The bigger your store, the more you pay. The bigger your store, the more sales you need to have. It's a good metric. Honestly, Jessica, you asked, like, what should a landlord do? A landlord should say, we give you X amount of conversions, X amount of click-throughs, and X amount of X amount of conversions, which means X amount of people walking by the shopping center, X amount of by your store in the shopping center, X amount of people walking into your store, and X amount of people actually buying. Those are the things. And you know what your cost of acquisitions are? By the way, they're going to be usually 50% of what your costs are online, assuming $100 acquisition cost online. I can show you the numbers how it works. But the point is, for the most part, you can convey it that way. Not a single landlord in this whole wide country, other than myself, and I don't have my first location up and running, so that's a problem, other than myself, are not using these types of terms, okay? Now, what's the right metric? That is the right metric. It's not about, like, what's your media value of oh, come on, media value of a store? What is it, a TV show? This is not CPM, it's not marketing. Marketing is CPM. I want to know what I'm paying, and that feeds into a bigger thing. What's my awareness? What's your impressions? Awareness, that's important. What's my click-through? What's the people coming in? That's important. What's my conversion? And here is where it gets entirely unlocked. We have an issue. iOS 14.5 has stopped us from being able to track our customers. Neely, Jessica, Rebecca, let me ask you. Wouldn't you want to be able to add something to your cart online, show up in store, and it's there?
Always.
And when you show up, that it's there. You just agreed to be tracked.
I know.
Think about it, right?
But I don't.
You just agreed to be tracked, and that's okay. You're okay with that.
No cookies. Is it like the no cookie? No.
Right.
No, not the cookies you ate, Jessica. 1 second. The point I'm making is that you agreed to be tracked. I'm sorry.
So it's actually green eggs today.
Green eggs and ham cookies.
Not the ham.
Green eggs, not cookies today.
But okay, so back on my train of thought. Thanks for that, Jessica. But back on my train of thought. So essentially, you agree to be tracked between store and online, and iOS 14.5 isn't going to block it. You know why? Because the reason iOS 14.5 is blocking it is because you were using someone's data for your economic purposes, as opposed to using their data for their purposes when they decide that they want it, okay? And all this legislation that's going to start coming out now that's being worked on with regards to tracking people demographically, all that stuff falls apart. So my ultimate point over here to make is that the reason we're not thinking about things, because we're thinking in silos. Store, online. Online doesn't work. Store works. How do you get someone to the store? It's by using online to bring them to the store. And ultimately, when you combine it all as one, you don't need to know if it's the store that did it or not, because you know what? Here's a little dirty little secret. You have no clue if that click-through came because you advertised on Instagram and Facebook before the person clicked through on Twitter. Because acquisition cost of $100 is not because your Facebook click-through is $100. It's because it costed you $100 to get that customer through 3 different places potentially. It could also be because your Facebook click-through is $100 too. Separate story. But the point I'm making is that if you look at it as one package, it works nicely. If you look at it as separate pieces, it falls apart as a house of cards and you fail.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You got to know your customer.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So
know your customer.
We're coming up on an hour, and we normally do the crystal ball of what's happening next. But we're going to do our crystal ball, but I'm going to throw in one extra point to our crystal ball. So in addition to the crystal ball of what's going to happen over the next 24 months, because 22 to 24 months seems to be the magic number that keeps popping up between conversation here, I would also like to know what term you think should be out when it comes to retail, and we should just forget about it.
Term as in a word?
As in acquisition costs, as in halo effect, as in e-commerce channel, as in Can we stop talking about daytime populations because everybody works from home now? Can we start talking, what would be the term that we think is being overused, is outplayed, and needs to just be gone? Just be gone from the whole conversation.
Good. Who wants to go first? No one's
Rebecca's
thinking.
thinking.
Rebecca, you got something?
I'm thinking.
Okay.
So sorry, are you gonna go?
No, you're gonna go.
Okay. So predictions. I mean, let's see. I've already done the like people are migrating south, more stores are opening in the south prediction. Okay. I think, and this is just like my very specific retail lens.
Yep.
And this is, maybe this is less of a prediction and more of like a hope. I hope that we see more direct-to-consumer brands willing to unsilo themselves and like partner up, not merge, but like partner up to create a better shopping experience for customers. Because I think, and again, nothing is new under the sun, the department store came about because people wanted to go to one place to shop and not go to a lot of little places to shop. And you have kind of this one-stop shop. I think now people are like, oh, but I have a direct-to-consumer brand that does dresses, and then a direct-to-consumer brand that does my leggings that I like, and a direct-to-consumer brand that does my handbags that I like. But like, what if I could just like go to one place and they were all there? But I don't like malls because malls are ew. So I hope that we'll see some sort of a like, call it a marketplace, call it a collective, call it a something. I don't really retail park. I don't know. But I'm hoping that we'll see some sort of a like, you know, what I think Naked and to a degree Bait, although they were quite niche in the tech side, were trying to do, but because they lacked the merchandising foresight, you know, to create a real customer story, kind of failed at. So I think, you know, that's more of a hope, less of a prediction, but I hope it comes true.
It's a prediction, Rebecca.
Okay. It's a prediction. The word, oh, this is going to be real unpopular. I would love it if omnichannel went away.
Oh,
because there is only brands. Like you can no longer launch and be e-commerce only. Like you will not grow beyond a certain point unless you have, and I'm not saying you have to open an owned store, but unless you have some sort of physical presence and some sort of digital presence. That is just how to grow a brand these days. So I think omnichannel, the word was created when all the direct-to-consumer brands started opening physical and they were like, oh my gosh, they're omnichannel. Like now it's just, no, we're just brands. Like that's what you do. So
no one knows what omnichannel really means anyways, right?
Well, that's the other thing is nobody knows what it means anyway.
Right? No, it's so true. Like, have you ever Googled the word omnichannel? Like, there's like all Urban Dictionary has their own. It's all over the place. It's awkward.
Google makes money off that
awkward. She's like, it's awkward.
It's awkward.
I'll go. Prediction. This is very consistent. I've been in the public domain with this prediction. I'm going to continue it. I am very hopeful that 2022 becomes the year of intentional baby making. And that would be very good on different levels for consumption, commerce, economy. You know, that's a very good thing. The reason why we say this is it is empirical that household formation under the age of 35 and household purchases have a leading indicator to children about a year later. And we saw such dramatic increases in household formation under the age of 35, really starting in kind of late 2016. So it's been building. So 2017, 2018, 2019, then we had pandemic. So we think there was a little bit of a delay possibly because student debt, of course, is a financial uncertainty and that is prevailing among millennials. But we think that they're waged up a little bit more than they've been before. They might have been promoted a little bit more in the last, sort of 5 years. So we think that they're ready. They've been purchasing millions of cars. They've procured millions of homes, and we're hopeful that we will start seeing millions of babies. Okay, so we're pretty optimistic about the Shlomo's family can't populate the nation alone. I'll just put it that way. If you know, you know. Okay.
If you guys don't know, we have
Coming
like
in hot on that
business.
one. Yeah.
We have a horse breeding business, you know, not a big deal.
The word, Jessica, that was a great challenge. I don't know. I'm gonna have something lame. I would love to just remove the word commerce and start getting everybody to think about customer again. Let's just go from if you're saying the word commerce, will you just think customer, and then hopefully that puts people in the customer journey mindset again, and maybe we'll have more hits than losses.
Okay, Shlomo, you're up.
Okay. So my word is not just a word, but it's also a report. When is Claritas taking the Gap report of their featured reports? Like the Gap, like what it was sold before to what it was sold now, because no one knows what's being sold online in a specific sector. If you guys don't know, a Gap report essentially is like in the furniture sector, X amount was sold X amount is sold in a 5 mile radius from people living in the 5 mile radius versus X amount bought in that 5 mile radius. So basically, you look at it. If there's more purchases than sales, then you know that people are buying outside the area. So there's opportunity for growth, and vice versa. So the point is, like, no one knows what's going on with e-commerce, and that's a brick and mortar report that brokers have been using. So that's a little inside baseball. My prediction for the next 24 months, and I'm really emboldened right now, guys. So I'm gonna go for a big one. An activist investor takes a 5% interest in Amazon and essentially advocates for a split up of the company between AWS and the retail. AWS does well. The retail, then either one or two things happen. Either the retail business merges with a shopping center owner like a Simon and tries to figure it out that way, or it falls apart under its own weight and then goes goodbye. Yes, there are pieces of the businesses you could salvage from it. And guys, I've been saying this for 10 years, but not 10 years. I've been saying this for about 7 years, that that business doesn't work. And specifically recently advocating this. I think ultimately, if an active investor had the guts to do it, you could really do well. The problem is, however, is that there's always been this propping up of this company. So you may go in and advocate for this change, and people look at you like you're a moron from outer space, like what type of stupid idea is that? But now, as things are starting to sort of change and people are looking at this profitability, not only do I think it's possible, I actually have the guts to actually say it out loud in a public forum, and hopefully not be called an idiot. So that's my prediction. The next 24 months, what happens. I look forward to seeing if that happens. But I do want to thank Jessica for sort of giving me the opportunity not to only make myself be a fool in the moment, but be able to look back in 24 months from now and say, Shlomo, the guy was a fool looking back because he was wrong.
I mean, what else am I here for? It's just
one thing.
My cat in the hat costume,
The cat in the hat.
All right, so I'll keep it short and sweet since we've gone a little over today. I'm going to kind of piggyback off of what's been said here. I think that we're going to see niche retail continue to go into brick and mortar, and we're going to see more brands come offline and actually be within brick and mortar presence. And we're going to see sectors that were COVID proof actually go back in the box and into the digital side of the world. I don't think anybody, especially with babies, really cares about going to the grocery store. And I think that those footprints and those moving to warehouse and distribution and coming via delivery is going to continue to increase. But there's going to be a demand for specialty products, niche products, clothing, all of those types of things, actually in store, having a physical experience, and more experiential retail is going to continue to thrive. And that's what's going to actually expand within our retail shopping centers and eat up some of this excess space that Rite Aid's going to leave behind and Safeway's going to leave behind, and all these daily needs that can come from other sources without you having to carry your baby out of the car to get in there. Because ultimately, if that's what's going to happen, you have to create efficiencies in your day-to-day operations as a human, and we're all learning to be more efficient with our time, because COVID, if it did nothing less, taught us that knowing who your neighbors are and spending time with your family is actually kind of cool, rather than being on a hamster wheel 24/7. So that is my prediction on what happens with retail in the next 24 months. I think it's the emergence of niche retail and the continual contraction of our daily needs retail that's going to continue to come via services and delivery. The word I would get rid of is, I'm going to stick with it. It's daytime pop. Can we stop talking about daytime population metrics? Like, nobody cares anymore. We work from home. We work from our vacation. We work from our cell phone. We work from our cars. Let's face it. Nobody cares about daytime population. Let's just stop it already. That's all I got for you.
Right. All righty. So thank you, everybody. This was a really, really great one. There's so much left unsaid and even for me. Can you imagine? I still have what to be said. But
I have like a list of words that I'm like, I can't wait to create slides on all of this. And I'm just going to start like calling Rebecca and being like, just throwing one-line words that are consumer satisfaction. Tell me now.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so I just as we wrap up over here, guys, check us out, www.re-Tales.io, or LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Apple Podcasts.
He's everywhere.
Anywhere you need, just Google retails.io. You'll find us. We will hunt you. I'm sorry?
They said there's no way they can't find us.
Yes, exactly. So thank you, Neely. This was a really, really amazing.
Neely.
It was my joy and my pleasure. Thank you so much.
It was awesome.
And as Neely will say, we will now land the plane on this latest episode of Retails.io. Thank you, Neely. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.